Your coding agent is like an overeager junior developer with daily amnesia. No memory of your standards, no grasp of your architecture, no context about your product or your users. And so you waste hours fixing their code, explaining the same requirements, just going in circles. Well, 2 months ago, I released a solution. It's called Agent OS. It's a free open source system that brings spec-driven development to your coding agents. It teaches them to build like you build, not just following generic best practices, but your specific patterns, your architectural decisions, your coding style. And the response has been incredible to that very first YouTube video when I initially released Agent OS. One person said, "This is a game changer, a masterclass in state-of-the-art augmented software development." Another person said, "Legendary, finally, a real developer showing practical agentic workflows that actually lead to productivity." Or this one, "This is awesome. I've seen so many context engineering setups, and this is one of the best that I've seen." And as it turns out, it's not just solo developers that are adopting this. Teams are using Agent OS to standardize how they work with AI. Because here's the thing, when everyone on your team is prompting their AI agents differently, of course you're going to see wildly different results. But with a shared spec-driven approach, your code base stays consistent no matter who's driving the agent. I liked this comment from Justin Jackson. "I can see how this system is beneficial for AI agents, but it's also extremely helpful for dev teams, especially new hires." I agree with that one. Now, in the past few weeks, since my initial release of Agent OS, I've shipped a few major updates based on community feedback. New features, streamlined workflows, and better integration with the latest AI tools, especially Claude Code. So today I'm giving you the complete walkthrough, how to install Agent OS, how to customize it to your standards, and how to use it to turn unpredictable AI agents into reliable members of your development team. By the way, if you want to stay up to date on the latest developments to Agent OS and stay ahead of the curve when it comes to building with AI, then grab my free builder briefing. It's a 5-minute weekly read that helps you stay sharp. Head over to buildermethods.com to get yours. Now, what actually makes Agent OS different? Well, it's built on a simple but powerful concept: 3 layers of context. Think about how you onboard a new developer to your team. You wouldn't just throw them into your code base and say, "Good luck." You explain your standards, you share your product vision, and then you give them specific tasks to work on. That's exactly what Agent OS does for your AI coding agents. The first layer is your standards. This is how you build software in general. Your tech stack, your code style, your best practices, your opinions. Rules that you want your team and your agents to always follow no matter what project they're working on. Define your standards once so that every time you install Agent OS in a project, your agents are instantly smarter and more aligned to your way of building. The second layer is your product, what you're building and why. Your mission, your roadmap, your users, their use case. All the context that a developer or an agent would need to understand the why behind the code that they're writing. And the third layer are your specs. These plan out entire feature implementations, leaving no detail or decision to chance. They include user stories, technical specifications, design notes, along with a step-by-step trackable checklist for implementation. No more vague prompts or hoping that your agent just figures out what you want. Now here's the magic. You don't have to write novels of documentation. Agent OS handles that heavy lifting, generating detailed product plans, comprehensive specs, breaking down tasks. You just guide and review. But here's what's crucial. Every decision, every standard, every architectural choice stays under your control. Your agent builds exactly how you would build because it's working from your playbook. No more hoping your agent just gets it. No more endless rewrites, just consistent quality code that follows your standards and matches your style every single time. Now, let's talk about how Agent OS gets installed. It's a 2-part system that keeps you fully in control of every aspect. First, I recommend installing the base installation somewhere on your system, typically the home directory. It serves as your source files for every project installation. So this is where you would customize your standards that define how you build software, your coding style, and so on. You can also enable Claude Code support, cursor support, or both in your config file located in your base installation. Then when you install Agent OS into a new project or an existing project, it copies those standards and instructions directly into your code base. Now they're part of your project, ready to be customized further if needed, or checked into Git and shared with your team. Now, if you work on different kinds of projects like I do, you can define different sets of coding standards using the project types feature in Agent OS. Now, one quick note, I'm continuously making improvements to AgentOS, and I'm releasing new versions all the time. So it's possible that by the time you're watching this video, some of the details may have changed. So you should always check the documentation for the most up-to-date details and guides on how AgentOS works. Access those docs and grab your free copy of AgentOS by going to buildermethods.com/AgentOS. All right, let's get AgentOS installed first on my system using the base installation, and then I'll install it in a project. So I'm here on buildermethods.com/AgentOS. That's where you can find all of the documentation. I'm going to go down to the installation instructions. So we're going to start with this base installation. Again, the base installation will be where I can define all of my custom coding styles and best practices and standards for how we build things. And then every time I install AgentOS into a project, it's going to pull my files from my base installation and copy them into the project. So we'll start with that base installation first. Now, the easiest way to install it is to use one of our base installation scripts. There's a couple to choose from depending on which coding agent you're using. So this first one would be your base installation of AgentOS with Claude Code support. So use this if you're only using Claude Code. And the second one would be the same thing, except it's only enabling Cursor support. Now, in my case, I actually use both Claude Code and Cursor. So I'm going to use this third one, and that includes the flags for both. Now, as of this recording, Claude Code and Cursor have official support with AgentOS, but it is very easy to adapt it to any of the other coding agent tools out there. So I'm just going to click this copy button to get this onto my clipboard. And then I need to decide where on my system I want to install this base installation. Now, I typically recommend your home folder, but it doesn't have to be there. Now, again, we're not yet installing it into a project. We will install it into individual projects a little bit later. So I'm here in Cursor, and I'm going to use the terminal that's built into Cursor. And I'm actually not yet in my home folder. So I'm going to CD into that by doing this. Now I'm in my home folder, and I also happen to be looking at my system's home folder right here. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that command in. So this is going to run the base installation script for AgentOS. This is pulling right off of the public GitHub for AgentOS. And as you can see, we have the Claude Code flag and the Cursor flag already included. So let's go ahead and run that. And you can scroll back up to see everything that it did. It does give you a few next steps, like customizing your standards, which we're going to do in just a second. You can configure some project types in your config file, and then we'll navigate into an actual project. And that's when I can install AgentOS into a project. Now, by the way, this install script gave me my project installation command. So this command is personalized to my system. Yours might look a little bit different depending on where you chose to install it. So you'll want to either bookmark that or create a terminal alias for it, since you would use it every time you're installing AgentOS into a project, which we're going to do in just a minute. Before we do that, let's just see what it put onto my system. So here I'm looking at my home folder, and now I have this AgentOS folder. And this contains a few more things than what will be installed into individual projects. We can start with our config file here, just to take a quick look at that. This has the current version of AgentOS. It shows me which coding agents I have enabled support for. So in this case, I have both Claude Code and Cursor enabled. And then this is where I can also define a couple of project types. Also here in my base installation, we have the instructions folder. So this is like the core system that comes with AgentOS. These are the core instructions that handle all of the operations. Now, most of these are good to go. You don't really need to customize anything in here. Of course, you can. These are just markdown files that live on your system. And so AgentOS is your system to adapt however you need to. But I am continuously tweaking and improving these core instructions, as well as the meta instructions that these call on. Now, what you definitely need to customize are your standards. So what we put in here by default are sort of just a starting point. So we've got like some best practices, and then we have code style and your default tech stack. So that default tech stack is sort of like the list of things that you typically or always use in all of your projects. Code style are specific conventions and styling and your opinions on how exactly you want code to be formatted and actually look in your files. Best practices are a little bit more strategic, kind of higher level principles for how you want your agents to be thinking and strategizing around how it implements code. We've got some starter stuff in there for you. And then inside the code style folder, this is where you can put specific code style notes as it relates to certain languages. Like here are some basic CSS styling notes, some HTML formatting notes. These are all intended to be like starter templates for you to go in and customize. And that's what I'm gonna do right now. So on my desktop is where I temporarily put my personal standards, which I've already customized to an extent. And I'm actually going to just move these into my actual base installation. And that's actually going to replace the standards that came with Agent OS. So now when I look at my standards, this is my actual go-to tech stack on most Ruby on Rails projects. These are my personal best practices, which are not all that different from what came out of the Agent OS installation. But then in the code style folder, I have more specific notes on how I want Tailwind CSS to be handled. I've got some notes on how I want forms to be set up. I use my own UI components library for Rails. Some HTML style stuff. Now, this is still like a simplified version of what I'm actually using day to day, but I'm going to try to keep this video a little bit simple and to the point here. Now, I have not yet set up project types, but also here in my base installation, we have some commands, and these are going to be converted into Claude Code commands and cursor rules. And then inside here, we have some Claude Code agents. Again, these are also going to be installed into our project installation. So these would only be used if you're using Claude Code. That's one of the benefits of using Claude Code with Agent OS. It really takes advantage of sub-agents. All right, so now that I have Agent OS installed on my system, let's go ahead and get it installed on an actual project. So over here, I have a new project that I'm starting to work on. Let's call it Creator Hub. It's a project management application for creators. Now, in this case, it's a new application that I just started up today, but Agent OS can be installed into any project, including existing projects that might be midway through development already. So to install Agent OS into a project, we're going to follow the project instructions. So I'll go back to installation. So we've already done the base installation. Now let's go into project installation. Now, assuming that you've installed the base installation, your project installation command might be a little bit different from mine. And that's why you'll want to take note of that after you install the base installation. Basically, you just need to call this setup project.sh from wherever it lives on your system. So if you have installed Agent OS in your home directory like I did, then this first command is what you'll probably need to use. If you've installed it somewhere else, wherever that path to Agent OS that you've installed on your system, that's the one that you'll want to use. So in my case, I'm just going to call it from my home directory. And by the way, if for whatever reason you decided to forego the base installation, you can actually just install Agent OS directly into a project using one of these commands, which pulls it off of the GitHub repo. But I do recommend using the base installation since that's where you'll want to make your customizations that get copied into every project that you work on. If you do it this way, then you'll need to just make those customizations directly in the project itself. Anyway, let's go ahead and run my project installation. This is going to copy it from my base installation. So here I am in the Creator Hub project. In Terminal, I have navigated into this project directory. So that's where I'm going to run my setup project command. And so again, you can sort of look back to see exactly what happened here. And so as you can see, now I have this Agent OS folder, which lives inside of my project directory. And then it has my instructions and my standards. And it made copies of those from my base installation and it put them into my project. So this installation is self-contained inside the project. I can commit it into Git. And now if I'm working with team members, we can all access the same set of instructions and standards. It has all of my coding style, including, for my tech stack, Ruby and Tailwind CSS. Your tech stack might be very different, and your standards would be carried in that way. Now, since I am using Claude Code, The project installation also brought in the sub-agents that come with Agent OS. As of this recording, this is the set of sub-agents, and you're going to see those in action when I start running the commands. But those are now in my Claude folder in the project. Same thing with the commands. So now we have these commands that are available to me to start using, and I'm going to demonstrate those in just a second. And since I am here in Cursor and I have my cursor support enabled, in the cursor folder, inside the rules folder, it created a bunch of cursor rules. And those are the same commands that Claude has access to. So in other words, I can run the same commands using Claude Code or the Cursor AI agent. And what these really do, they're really just very simple, kind of 2 lines, and all they really do is reference the instructions that live inside of the Agent OS folder in my project. So that's how both Claude and Cursor can both reference the same set of instructions here in my project. Now, just to show you how these commands work, when I'm in Claude Code, I can hit the / key, and now these top 5 commands are the Agent OS commands: analyze product, create spec, create tasks, execute tasks, and plan product. We're going to start using these in just a minute. Now over in Cursor, I can go to rules, and now I have these same rules available to me here. All right, so now that we have Agent OS installed in our project, before we start getting into features and specs, remember that second level of the context, that is the product, what we're building, the mission, the roadmap, the high level direction and use case for our product. To establish that using Agent OS, we're gonna run either the plan product command, that's if you're planning a new product from the ground up, and that's what I'm doing here. But if you're installing Agent OS into an existing product that's midway through development, then instead of this one, you'll wanna run analyze product. It does mostly the same things as the plan product, except it analyzes the progress that you've made so far. Now, in this case, it's a new product, so I'm gonna go ahead and run the plan product command. And the first thing it's going to do is it's going to ask me a couple of questions about what is the main idea for the product. It's going to ask me to list a few of the key features. It's going to ask who the target users are and their use cases, what my tech stack preferences are, and whether or not we're already inside this application, which we are. All right, so I'm answering the first question. Now, for this demo, I'm just keeping it very short here. Sometimes I would give it a lot more details that I've hashed out beforehand. For the tech stack, I'm just going to say my usual tech stack because it already has that. And this is actually my chance to deviate at all if I want to from my typical tech stack. But in this case, I'm just going to stick to my usual stuff. And yes, we're already in the project. So I'm going to go ahead and let it use that as its starting point, and then it's going to get to work. So here is the first sub-agent that I just called on, the context fetcher. And what that is doing is it's checking out my tech stack preferences, and it's reading that, it's understanding that, and it's going to use that to build out the product plan and the roadmap. Okay, so now it just called on another sub-agent, the file creator sub-agent, and that will start to build out some files and folders inside of my Agent OS folder, and it just did that. It created the product folder. We're gonna start filling this up with a few files. All right, so it looks like it has finished the first file, which is the mission.md. And what it did here was it created a pitch for the product and who the target users are. It lays out a few of the core problems that this product will solve, and it shows exactly how it will solve them. Now, of course, I want to go in here and review this very closely and make sure it's fully aligned with my vision for the mission for this product. It also created a mission light version of this. This is a very shortened version, which makes it easier to reference. It's a little bit more context efficient. And then it also just documented the product's tech stack in here using my preferences, a little bit more formatted. So it created this roadmap.md, and this is like a high-level roadmap for how this product can be built out and the sequence of the features that it'll have. Now, this isn't yet a spec or an actual task list. This is more of a high-level tracker for where we're at in the roadmap. And it's pretty common that the roadmap will change as we go along, and that's perfectly fine. But let's check out the process, and now it's all completed. So the product planning process is all complete. It gave me a sort of a recap of everything that happened. And now before we get into planning out features, you're gonna wanna go into these docs, especially your roadmap, to make sure it really aligns with how you expect this product to be built out. Now, in my case, in this Rails application, I've already initiated the project with my components library, and I've actually already installed the user authentication. So I'm gonna just add an X to that because Agent OS will check this roadmap when it's suggesting the next task to work on. So now let's actually go ahead and start planning out the first spec for the first feature. So I'm going to go back into Claude Code. And since we're starting something new, I'll just go ahead and clear the context. So to start working on a totally new feature, you'll want to use your create spec command. And I'm just going to run that on its own. Okay, so the first step in the create spec process was for the context fetcher subagent to go into my roadmap and see what the next feature is on the roadmap. And as you can see, it figured out that the project management core feature is the next one because it looked at my roadmap and it saw that we've already finished this one. So it's suggesting this is the next feature to work on. Now, sometimes I go ahead and follow the roadmap exactly. In this case, that's probably what I'm going to do. Other times I'll deviate from the roadmap and I might plan out a new feature on the fly and I'll give it some raw instructions or things that I've already hashed out, maybe in Claude web app, bringing it in here. So you don't have to always follow your roadmap exactly. In this case, I do want to start with the projects feature. So I'm going to just say, yes, create a spec for projects. And so now AgentOS and Claude Code are going to put together a detailed spec for the projects feature. Now, before it really gets into it, it's going to ask me a few clarifying questions to make sure that we are totally on the same page and really aligned on this thing. So, it's actually suggesting ideas for what might go into a feature like this. And I actually kind of like some of these ideas. So, all right, so I gave it a few more notes about my particular project, sort of just pointing it in the right direction. Again, this is a Ruby on Rails project, and I have some infrastructure already built into it and some pre-established views and layouts and some styling. I want to make sure that the agent and the specs are going to follow those conventions. Again, these are always going to be different in your case, depending on your tech stack, your framework, any components and styling that you're using. And really, as I go along here and I refine my system, I'm going to start to put some of these common conventions into my actual standards that are built into AgentOS so that I don't need to explain this every time. And so that sort of shows you how you can refine and improve the way that you work with AgentOS over a long period of time. So I'm going to give it those instructions. And now it's going to proceed with creating the detailed spec for this feature. Now, it's not actually starting to code anything yet. It's just creating the specification, which I will review in detail before we get into creating tasks and actually coding. All right, so inside of my AgentOS folder in my project, it created a new folder called specs. And inside this specs folder is where each of the specs for every new feature that we're planning will be created. So in this case, we're planning the project management core feature. The folder is dated, and inside of this folder is where the main spec document, a spec light, which is easier to reference, and some sub-specs like the technical spec and database schema. Before I dig into those, let me show you a little bit under the hood into the instructions for what it just followed to create this stuff. So if I go into instructions, core, create spec. So this is the actual process that AgentOS and Claude Code just followed just now to create my spec. It's got some pre-flight instructions, and then it goes kind of step by step. Now this is like a mix of XML and Markdown, and it's really structured carefully in a way for agents to be able to parse very easily and be very efficient. And I'm constantly tweaking and improving the reliability for how coding agents are following instructions and the formatting and making sure that they're not missing specific details. So, it goes kind of step by step, clarifying the requirements, and then it has some templates built in for how we want the spec to be structured. It'll create some user stories. And then it gets into creating a technical specification, database schema, conditional if, only if we're actually changing the database. So that's just a look at one of the core processes that come built in with AgentOS. Now, let's look at the actual spec that was created. So we'll start with the main spec file. This is like an overview. We've got some user stories, some like jobs to be done, if you will, some scope to list out exactly what will be included and what is considered out of scope. Now, if we look at the sub-specs, we are going to be making some database migrations, and I'm going to want to review this closely to make sure that it's structuring things exactly how I want them to be. And this is looking good. All right, so here's the technical spec, just more granular instructions for how things are going to be built out. Again, I'll want to review every single line of this. This is the power of spec-driven development. We, as experienced product designers, engineers, architects, we need to make sure that the specs are all carefully crafted and aligned to what we want, and then we can let the coding agent go ahead and build them out. Now, here's something that I just want to keep simpler for now. I don't actually want to have it implement drag and drop. So little details just to make sure that it's not going to go off and do the wrong thing. And I'm going to make sure that all of that is correct. Now I'm going to hop back into Claude Code. Now, once I'm happy with the spec that was all documented and all the details are exactly how I want them, my next step is to turn the spec into an actual list of tasks that the agent can follow. So we're going to run the create tasks command, and I'm just going to let that run. Now, again, we're not yet actually coding anything. We're just creating a tasks list. Okay, so that's all done. Let's take a look at our tasks. And here we go. So it just broke down everything that was documented in our spec into a list of tasks, 1 through 5. Each of them have subtasks. And again, I'm going to want to go line by line and make sure that it's following exactly the order of implementation that I want. Now, when AgentOS sets up a task list from your spec, it's going to follow a test-driven development approach. So each task is typically going to start with writing the test for that task, and then it's going to make sure that all of the tests pass. So after creating that task list, by default, I can just say, yes, proceed with task number 1, and that's going to just follow this first task. But I can also say, go ahead and build tasks 1, 2, and 3, or do all 5. And that's actually what I'm going to do. I'm going to run the execute tasks command, and I'm going to add to that by hitting tab, go ahead and implement all 5 tasks. Okay, so now AgentOS and Claude Code are going to actually get to work on implementing this feature, following our task list. So as you can see, it's starting by gathering some context about the project. It looked back to that mission to understand the why behind everything that it's building. It's also going to gather context into my code style and best practices. And then it's calling on another sub agent here to run a Git workflow. It's actually going to change to a feature branch, and that's all handled by the Git workflow sub agent. Again, the benefit of using sub agents is that it's actually not taking up space in our context window. All right, so I can see here it has started to write out some model tests, and it started to create some database migrations. So while it's working, let's go ahead and take a look at what's actually happening here under the hood. We'll go back into my core instructions, and let's check out the execute tasks command. So again, just a very meticulous approach to giving it a process flow step by step. Some of these, it's being instructed to use sub agents. We've got some conditional context gathering going on, reviewing the best practices, reviewing the code style. All of this is built into the instructions and the context that it's going to gather while it builds out the code. And then here's where we get into using our test runner, some test verification for each individual task. And let's see how we're doing here. So it's been working through the task list and making a bunch of changes, running some migrations, writing some tests, setting up the views. Now it appears to be finalizing all the tests related to this feature. Okay, so now it's using the test runner sub agent to run all of the tests in the application to make sure that they all still pass. And it went ahead and it updated my task list. It marked them off all as completed, so that's good. And it looks like all tests are now passing. So now it moved on into the Git workflow sub agent to go ahead and create a commit message into Git. It's obviously a lot more descriptive than I would typically write myself, so I like that. Okay, so now it called on the project manager sub agent to verify that all of the tasks have actually been completed. It's also going to check on my roadmap, and it updated my roadmap accordingly. So if I go back into my product roadmap, now I can see that the project management core has automatically been checked off by Claude Code. Next, the project manager sub-agent is going to write a short recap document. And so now inside of the AgentOS folder in my project, now we have a recaps folder. And inside that are going to be these markdown files for every feature spec that we finished the implementation of. It's going to create this recap. So here is that recap document, just a short recap, key completed features, a list. Here's the original context, which sort of summarizes the original requirements for the spec. These recaps are good to have documented just for the team to see what happened and refer back. But it's also really good to be able to feed these into the agent tomorrow or next week to sort of pick up where we left off. It's also really good if I'm switching between Claude Code and Cursor's agent or any other agent. It's a way to easily transfer that context from one agent to another tool if I need to. It just played a little sound to let me know that the whole process is complete. That's really nice to have if I've gone off and worked on something else on a different tab or a different workspace. And now this implementation is all complete. It gave me a little report here on what's been done. It's giving me some instructions on what is actually ready for me to test in the browser. And yeah, there we go. So why don't we actually test this out in the browser and see what happened? All right, so I'm running my Rails application. It's actually running on my instrumental components library. So we've got a little navigation here. I'm going to go into this new projects feature that it just added to the application. I'm going to create a new project. And it looks like I can select a content type for this project. So that's kind of interesting. I'll set it to podcast. And it looks like I can actually upload some files. Let's try that. All right, so here is the example project. It's interesting how it created a little label here for the project type. It looks like a little UI issue in the settings dropdown, which I will need to clean up a little bit. But it is using my standards on the form styling. And so this is sort of like that last phase of the cycle, if you will, where clearly there are some elements that are still gonna need some minor fixes, some tweaks, some polish. That is a normal part of the process. You know, we're not expecting the agent to get it 100% perfect on every run, but it did just build out an entire feature. So I'm not gonna need to go back to square one, especially the UI and UX polish when it comes to building software. That's something that I still find myself coming in and making some minor fixes to the applications to get them to that finish line. That's a normal part of the process, but it's something that I'm really keeping an eye on because I'm really looking for ways to streamline the design process. So that's probably going to be another upcoming update into my AgentOS system, is handling both the front end and the back end side and really working out those workflows. Now, of course, I can look through all the code that it wrote, and I'll inspect all of that. And I ran my test suite, and it wrote a bunch of tests, and those are all passing. So yeah, I think this new app is off to a good start. Obviously, there's a lot of work to go before it's something that's ready to actually ship. But that gives you a look at the general cycles. So now every time we start a new feature, I'm going to start with the create spec command, and then after that, we're going to do the create tasks command, creating the tasks from the spec. And once that's all done, and then execute tasks to actually build out the feature. So here's what's actually changed for me since I've started using AgentOS in all of my projects. I'm shipping entire features in the time that it used to take me to build a single component. Not because I'm cutting corners, but because my agent actually understands what I want the first time. But speed isn't even the biggest win here. It's predictability. Before AgentOS, working with AI was like rolling a dice. Sometimes you'd get exactly what you wanted. Sometimes you'd spend hours untangling the mess. Now, I write the spec, review the plan, and then let it run, knowing my agent will follow my standards and build exactly how I would build. But here's something nobody really talks about. When your agent can build entire features autonomously, you suddenly have all this time while it's working. And if you're like me, sitting around waiting doesn't feel very productive. And so that's exactly what I covered in my video called Finding Flow with AI Coding Agents. It's about how to stay productive and in the zone while your agents are handling the heavy lifting. So that's your next watch after this one. And you can get AgentOS for free by going to buildermethods.com/AgentOS. And all of the latest documentation and guides are there. And as always, hit subscribe on the channel to follow all of my content on building with AI. Let's keep building.